So welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Molly Ilbrock. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this ESMT Open Lecture, Negotiating with No as a part of the Berlin Science Week. To those of us joining both here at ESMT Berlin and online, I would like to say thank you for being here. I'm hoping to learn a lot today. I think this is going to change my life. Let's see. Don't want to promise too much. We're very, very happy to have Martin Schweinsberg, ESMT Associate Professor of Organizational Behavior, as our speaker. His research is not only about no, but it's about negotiation impasses, data analysis psychology, and advanced analytics. He's been widely published, and he was named one of the 40 best business school professors under 40 by Poets and Quants. We're also joined today with a great moderator, Qiao Zhang. Thank you very much. She will be taking over after Martin's lecture. She is a leadership specialist. She is specialized in leadership development and AI-centric programs. She has more than 20 years of experience, and I hope she's better at saying no than I am, but we'll see. Her big no is the stop at an hour. So no, we can't talk anymore. So after the lecture, we'll open up the floor to questions in-house. I hope that everyone in the live stream enjoys the session as well. Martin, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Well, wonderful. Thank you, Molly. Welcome, everyone. I was told normally I go way to the front, but I was told I have to stay here for the online folks joining us. So my name is Martin. As Molly said, I'm an associate professor at ESMT, and I have my own reasons for being interested in this topic. When I was in primary school, it seems that when I was in a toy store and I had friends with me, I kept buying toys for them. They say they would like a toy, and then I would buy it for them. And my parents at some point put a hard stop to that and said, you can't do that anymore. I have 3 kids myself now. They're 8, 6, and 3. And I know this is a bit of an unhealthy way to relate to other people. So if you feel like you're struggling with no, I have the same challenge. And so do we all, I think. Let's see, is this working? Yeah. So today I want to talk about three things, just to establish a baseline, look at some data at how often we actually say no, you and me, some psychological reasons for why we maybe don't say no as often as we would like, and then just some practical ideas about how we can say no better. Imagine you had the following task that I might give you now, you're given in a classroom or somewhere else. You will ask strangers in person for a favor. You will ask them to fill out a paper and pen questionnaire that takes about 5 to 10 minutes to complete. Kind of an awkward task to have, right? If you think about Berlin, going out on the streets, you're like, hey, can you fill out this questionnaire for me? It takes about 10 minutes to complete. Most of us would rather not do that. But what do you think for yourself, maybe, if you were to predict how many people would you have to approach out on the streets of Berlin before 5 of them say yes to you? Any guesses? 50? Molly thinks 50? 50? Someone more? 100? Wow. Okay, that's seemingly pessimistic about Berlin. Maybe for a good reason. So colleagues of mine who study this much more systematically, Vanessa Bones is one of the leaders in this field. The study design of these studies is always very similar. They have some people predict these kinds of questions, how many people would I have to ask, and then some other poor folks have to actually go out and ask. And so then you can see, what do we think? How many people will say yes to something weird, and how many people actually say yes or no to that? She does that with all kinds of requests. Can I borrow your phone? Can you give me directions to take me there? And not just 2 minutes away, but 5, 10 minutes away. I mean, in Berlin, if you go to the wrong supermarkets, they don't even take you to the aisle, right? You ask, oh, where's the milk? They say, oh, over there. Here, you have to ask them, can you take me to this place that's 5 to 10 minutes away? And the question then is, how many people would we seemingly have to ask? We think around 50 maybe in Berlin. In this particular study, in one estimate, was 20 people. People only had to ask 10 people, though. So a lot less people than we think. If you look at predicted no's versus actual no's, in one study across 12 studies and more than 14,000 participants. Gets kind of technical, but in essence, people say yes twice as often than we think. Whether it's, can I borrow a phone? Can you take me over there? Can you fill out this weird questionnaire for me? We underestimate how often people say yes. And this is probably a conservative estimate because requesters had to use a rather unconvincing script. They were only allowed to ask, will you fill out a questionnaire for me? Not use any charm or persuasion or trying to build a relationship. Just straight up ask, can I have your phone to make a call? So in reality, this difference is probably even bigger. So one optimistic takeaway from this is that we are probably all much more powerful and persuasive than we think, simply because we tend to overestimate how often people say no, and we underestimate how often people say yes. That's also why negotiations are common, because you can't just say the no. People kind of wiggle their way out typically. They don't say straight up no. They kind of say, I'm not so sure. When I was asked to do this event, I also initially said no. And I had a very good reason, because I think, Molly, you guys wanted it to be at 6 o'clock. And 6 o'clock, I'm with my kids. So I can't do, it's a very good reason to say no. And then they moved it to the lunchtime, to now, and I couldn't, couldn't get out of it anymore. But in some of our own studies, we found that one study, more than around 25% of all social interactions seem to involve elements of negotiations. In another study, we and others found that managers, people who work in businesses, negotiate 15 to 25% of their time. So we spend a lot of time navigating this tension between yes and no to get more of what we want. But saying no is difficult. And why is it so difficult? What could be a psychological reason for that? Before going to the studies, I just wanted to give you a word of humble caution. The studies I share with you, I share them because I consider them to be illustrative. I think they illustrate a certain point very well. They're not necessarily conclusive. And they've been criticized for many different reasons, many of them good. And if you want to talk about those concerns, I would love to talk about them. But the discipline that I find myself in, or that I come from, social psychology, started with a very simple motivating question. And that is, why do seemingly good people end up doing bad things? Many of the sort of original social psychologists had to leave Nazi Germany after the Shoah and the Holocaust, and they were kind of puzzled by that experience and asked themselves, why is it that seemingly good people end up doing bad things? The study that we look at today, in particular, they're called the Milgram studies, and they're infamous for a number of reasons. But it's a set of studies that can help us get a sense of why we may not say no, even when we realize that really is clearly the right thing to do. What keeps us from saying no? To get a sense for this study, I invite you just time travel a little bit into the 1960s and geographically to the East Coast of the US, to New Haven, Connecticut. And you may wander around the street and find this advertisement for a study, where you're told that we will pay you $4 for 1 hour of your time. Persons needed for a study of memory. $4 per hour was a pretty good salary at the time, actually. So you might sign up for that, or you may just have a lot of time, or you're interested in learning and memory. For whatever reason, if you decide to sign up for this, they will invite you to come to Yale University, to come to the lab, to take part in the study. And as you arrive, the first person you see is a certain Mr. Wallace. Here he is, looks kind of friendly. In other variations of this study, they've done this with Mrs. Wallace, so with female counterparts. And they also did this not at Yale University, but in an office building. More on that in a moment. But Mr. Wallace was described by Stanley Milgram himself, the psychologist who did these studies, as follows. Mr. Wallace was played by a 47-year-old accountant, trained for the role. He was of Irish-American descent, and most observers found him mild-mannered and likable. Kind of a nice chap. As you talk to Mr. Wallace, at some point the experimenter comes in and he explains what's going to happen today. He says, you guys will do a memory task. This study is about the effects of punishment on learning. One of you will be the learner and one of you will be the teacher. In reality, Mr. Wallace was always assigned to the role of the learner, and whoever came as a study participant was always assigned the role of the teacher. The study setup was as follows. After the introduction and some more explanations, the learner goes to another room. In that room, the learner sits down on a chair and has electrodes attached to his or her arm. So they sit down and there's some electric equipment attached to the arm. When the learner makes a mistake in a memory task, the teacher then has to apply a small electric shock. This shock gets bigger and bigger over time. Both get to test this initial shock, and it's a bit more of a tickle. It's kind of a mild experience of, oh, that's annoying. Subsequent shocks are not real, but the teacher believes them to be real. And the memory task looked like this. So if you were the teacher, you would read out these words: blue, box, nice, day, wild, duck. And there's a break. And then you wait for Mr. Wallace to answer the following question, which is, which word was just paired with blue? So you can think about it. Which one do you think? If you pick box, very good. You don't get a shock. If you had picked blue, sky, ink, or lamp, the teacher then would have had to apply a small electric shock to you. This is the setup. In one room is the experimenter, the person running the whole thing. This is the teacher. That would be you if you had signed up for the study. And this is Mr. Wallace, the learner, the confederate. Now you notice this little part here. There's something odd looking here and a small red cable connecting your device to poor Mr. Wallace sitting here. What's in front of the teacher is an electric shock machine that he needs to operate whenever the learner makes a mistake. It looked like this. We can't see it here, but in the beginning, the voltage is described as mild, weak, and it's strong. And then at some point, it says very strong shock, intense shock, extremely intense shock, danger, severe shock, and over here, a region that's described as lethal. If you apply a shock like this, the other person will die. This was clearly not a study about memory. We now know that, maybe. But at the time, the participants were not so sure about that. Milgram's study really asked, will people say no or disobey doing something bad, something that they themselves consider to be wrong? Sandy Milgram also asked different groups to predict, what do you think? How many people would go all the way and apply seemingly lethal shocks? They asked students at Yale, they asked residents at New Haven, where Yale is located, and they also asked psychiatrists to predict how many people would go all the way and apply these seemingly lethal shocks. Students and residents say no one would ever do that. And psychiatrists at the time thought, oh, maybe 1 or 2%, because that was believed to be the population of people who would enjoy that kind of thing. Right? If you get a chance, kill someone, maybe. If you look at video footage of the actual participants in the study, it's difficult to watch. It's very painful to watch because they're clearly in distress. They sit there and they seem tormented by, on the one hand, knowing that they're doing something that doesn't feel right, because as they apply the shocks, Mr. Wallace in the other room reacts and he says, stop it, I can't take it anymore, it burns, you're killing me. It's really horrible. So they know that, and at the same time, they sit there thinking, but I'm supposed to do this. I signed up for the study. And there's this experimenter guy in the back, and you can protest, by the way. They could say, they can talk to the experimenter, they can say, I don't want to do this. This seems wrong. And if they did that, the experimenter would always respond with a prefabricated response. Typically something along the lines of, please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. The participants could always just stand up and leave the room. There was no problem. And if they ever protested 4 times in a row, the experiment would also stop. So all you need to do is to say no kind of 4 times and say, this seems wrong. And then you're out of this. The question then is, how many participants in this kind of setup, in that kind of situation, actually applied these seemingly lethal shocks? And in one of the many experiments that Milgram ran, it was 65% of people who went all the way on this shock machine to the end, where they couldn't go anymore. And they believed that poor Mr. Wallace, whom they had met just a few minutes earlier, was now dead. And so that poses many puzzling questions, of course. And one of the reasons why this study has been criticized is, lots of reasons. One is it causes a lot of distress to the participants. So people can't do these kinds of studies anymore. The biggest sort of scientific question, I think, is around what people call construct validity. What did these people actually do? Like, they applied the shocks, but what does it mean? Were they obeying authority? This is what Stanley Milgram believes they did, because it kind of fit his narrative. Were they just shy or timid, or they couldn't say no? That's how we kind of see it now. Those are all good questions. But it has been replicated. I put it into inverted commas because the term is somewhat unclear. But similar patterns have been found across locations and across time. So when people repeated this kind of experiment with variations, they found similar patterns, not just in the US, but across different cultures. So why is that? Stanley Milgram doesn't really explain any of this. He doesn't say why this happens. The studies, I think, raise more questions than they answer. And that's maybe also why they've become so kind of powerful and popular, because you can project a lot onto them. But what these studies do show is what psychologists call the power of the situation. Most social psychologists believe that what we think, feel, and how we act is a function of who we are, the kind of person we are, and the kind of situation we're in. And typically, all of us underestimate how powerful the influence of the situation is on us. And that is something that the Milgram studies, I think, demonstrate very well, which we'll see in just a moment. But the power of the situation here would say, it's not you who does these bad things. It's the situation you're in. These were not bad people, but the situation made them do bad things. And why can we say that? Because a little while ago, I told you there's 18 variations of this study that Milgram did. Some small changes, and that rate drops from 65% to 5%, 10%. In other situations, it's 91%. So how we behave in these situations depends a lot on the situation we're in. But it also made it difficult for these people to say no. And psychological research from all kinds of strands and literatures seems to suggest that we struggle to say no because fundamentally we want to belong to other people. And this awkwardness when someone asks us and we then say no to them seems difficult for us to entertain, because saying no to the request also feels like we're saying no to the person. And that seems difficult for us to do. But how then can we say no better? What are some practical ideas or suggestions that, building on this and other research, could help you and me say no more effectively? One is to realize that we already say no all the time. So when you say yes to a dinner with clients or colleagues or whatever it is, you also, of course, say no to dinner with your family. When you say no to weekly committee meetings or whatever else is asked of you, you can't advance your own projects at the same time. But typically, we say yes to requests that are direct and to people bold enough to ask, sometimes for selfish reasons. And by saying yes to those things, we say no typically to responsibilities that are rather implicit and maybe to people who depend on us. There's also, of course, a huge asymmetry in this asking. How long does it take to ask someone to do something for you? It takes them maybe a minute, maybe 3 minutes, maybe 10 minutes if they're really thoughtful. But to live up to the commitment can take hours, weeks, or months. And sometimes we think we're the person they ask, but in reality, we're number 25 on the list. There are already 24 other people who said no, and then they're hoping for us to be the sucker to be like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. But so your and my problem is then not that we can't say no, because we do that all the time. Our problem is to say no when we're in the situation, when someone directly wants something from us. This direct situation, someone asks us for something, and then to say no in that situation is particularly difficult, as it was for these people in the Milgram studies. So one very simple idea fundamentally is to simply change the situation you're in to help you say no. And the most simple thing you can do is to create distance and then to leverage the best possible communication channels to say no. So Milgram, remember this one setup? It looked like this, right? Experimenter and teacher in the same room. As the teacher, you could ask the experimenter, hey, this is odd. I don't feel this is, I want to get out of here. This seems wrong. But it just seems awkward to us. I had that the other day. I was in hospital for something that turned out not to be serious, but it could have been sepsis. So they sent me to the emergency room. And I was talking to the anesthesiologist, which in Germany, I think seems mandatory, because every time me or my kids had surgery recently, we always have to talk to them. And I had the choice of having full anesthesia, like full being completely sedated, or just my arm. And I tried to understand from the anesthesiologist what the different risks were with just the local anesthetics or the full anesthetics. And this lady said, very rare complications when it's the arm, and very little risk when it's full anesthetics. Basically meaningless information. Like, what does it mean? Very rare and few, nothing. And I know that in that moment, I should sort of probe her and say, okay, maybe 100 of these local anesthetics, how many bad incidents happen, and 100 of the full anesthetics, how many bad incidents happen, to get a better understanding of that. But in that moment, I couldn't get myself to, it sort of seemed uncomfortable, seemed awkward to do that. So this was that situation. You're in the room with this person, and you could say no, you could speak up, but most people don't. As I said, Stanley Milgram did many other variations of this. Here's just one. In his own words, in another series of experiments, we varied the physical closeness of the experimenter and the degree of surveillance he exercised. In experiment 5, the experimenter sat just a few feet away from the subject. In experiment 7, after giving initial instructions, and this is now important, the experimenter left the room and gave his orders by telephone. So they introduced a slight change in the situation by essentially adding a wall here or making the experimenter go somewhere else. And now they don't talk face to face, they talk over the phone. What happens now? Obedience dropped sharply when the experimenter was physically removed from the laboratory. In fact, everything remained the same, but now it wasn't 65% who couldn't say no, it was only 21%. So 3 times as many people found it difficult to say no when you're in the same room with them, but when you can call someone, much easier to say no. How can we use this then? And this has been now followed up by other studies that involve Zoom and other communication channels. It's always the same. If you want to get something done, it's best to ask people face to face, because that is most likely to get you a yes. And if you want to say no, it's easiest to do that when you're not facing them, because it's just awkward. And another study from 2017, this is a bit of a headline, I guess, takeaway. And I'm not sure this 34 times is very accurate or reliable. But asking face to face, again, proves to be much more powerful than asking for something via email. So how can we use this for ourselves? 3 steps. When someone asks something of you or of me, it's best to talk, listen, and learn, but not say yes yet or no. Just know in advance, you buy yourself some time. Because in that moment, you want to understand two things. One, what do they want? And two, why do they want that? We'll come back to why that's important in a moment. Step two, you want to create some distance for yourself to think. Like that experimenter leaving the room, you want to leave the situation so you can think with this less psychological pressure and make up your mind how much you want to help this person. And then three, you want to say yes or no using the best possible communication channel. Email might be very good because you can just clearly black on white say, no, I'm not doing this. I can't do that. But you may also need a phone call or video call to add some nuance. I was at lunch a while ago with a colleague of mine, and we walked to lunch. And as we walked to lunch, he said, I know they're going to ask me this thing, and I definitely can't do it. And I had lunch with him and with the people he talked to. And guess what? After the hour, I said to him, I'm absolutely confident they think you will do this thing that you don't want to do. Because he couldn't express it clearly. Kind of mumbled around it. Oh, yeah. One of these weak no's where you say, you kind of sign up for a project because you don't want to say no. That was the situation he was in. And the beauty of using communication channels for different purposes is you can leverage the power of that Milgram Experiment 7, where just being in another room makes it 3 times easier to say no. We can do that ourselves. A second idea is to understand, if we go back to why we struggle to say no, it is because we want to belong. The problem is that the people we care about are in our lives, but they're not in the room when people make requests of us. And psychologically, it's irrelevant that your friends and family and all kinds of people somewhere else who care about you and who you are responsible for. But when you're asked in that moment whether you can do A, B, C, it's very difficult to make that real and concrete. So, I mean, hopefully you don't do this, but if you were to ask me after this in person, hey, can you do A, B, C? I should know. And remember, at 3, I have to help my 3-year-old son build lanterns for his Laternenlaufen thing. But there's a good chance this is like vague and abstract. Yeah, I have my kids, of course, but in the moment that I face you, you are in my face and you are who is concrete. What could help us? We can affirm that we already belong. We can look at photos of loved ones. We can remember times with loved ones, or visualize or imagine when we will see loved ones again. Anything to make these people who are in our lives but not in the room concrete to us, so that now the choice is between these concrete people who we love and this person who wants something from us, which at least helps us set the balance right a little more. Because at the end of the day, you have to choose between one of 2 pains. And oftentimes it's these people who want something from you and these other people that you feel responsible for. And they don't have to be work versus family. Maybe you are responsible for your team and you see it as your task to protect your people from other stakeholders who make more and more demands on your team. These might be your people. But making that concrete and affirming that we already belong to someone can help us tremendously. The third way in which we can maybe say no better is to understand that we can say yes to the why, but no to the what. What does that mean? You're trying to fulfill the why behind the what. So first, you might be able to say no to what someone wants. Maybe you do that by creating distance, removing yourself from the situation. Maybe you also think about the people who would suffer if you said yes to something. And now you want to go a step further and say, so I can't do this, but help me understand, why do you want that? How could this be helpful for you? Someone might ask you, can you do X? And your answer might be, no, I cannot do X. But now you can go a step further and say, but tell me, how is X important to you? How would you use X? Are there other ways in which you could achieve X? So it doesn't have to be me who does this thing for you or who gives it to you, but maybe there are some things I can do that would make X a possibility for you. And a particularly elegant way of doing this is to realize that your no might be another person's yes. Or one person's trash can be another person's treasure. Maybe what they ask of you, you really don't want to do. It's the 100th time you have to do this thing. But for someone else, it might be an amazing opportunity. It might be the thing that they've been waiting for. And so if you can combine that, you can help someone get access to an amazing opportunity, but yourself freeing yourself from that responsibility. So first, you want to say, no, I can't do this. Maybe you removed yourself from the situation, you respond via email, maybe you crystallize the people that are in your lives but not in the room. And now you want to go a step further and ask yourself, but who would want to say yes to this? Can I introduce someone to this person who has this request to make both of them better off? Doesn't happen all the time, but regularly enough, I get asked to teach somewhere or to consulting work or something like that. And I get emails like this where someone says, can you do this? How much would it cost? We have a day on the 15th of November or whatever. And my background is I like teaching, but I try to minimize any outside teaching because I'd rather focus on research. So this is not what I want to do, typically. But I know many other people would love to teach, speak, have a public stage, consult with companies. They're like super excited about this. How could I respond? I suggest it depends on my willingness to help. So you don't just say yes or no, but you consider some nuance. Maybe if my willingness to help is low, I just say no. I'm sorry, I can't do that. Maybe if I want to help a bit more, I can help them help themselves. I can't teach them, but if you consider these resources, that book, and these exercises, I think you can connect the dots and more or less do it yourself. If I want to help even more, I might respond, say no, but identify someone else who could do it. Now, I can't teach because of these reasons, but there's this lady, she's amazing. Here's her name, here's another name, here's a third name. And if I want to go even further, because there's still a bit of friction for the person asking, I could make it completely frictionless for them. Still say no, already clarify the dates with the person, and offer to instruct them. So I might say, I'll contact this person and ask whether they are able to do this for you on that date. I can help them understand what you guys need, how to best do this, etc. I'm confident that with that kind of support, they will do a job just as good as me, or maybe even better than me. And so now you said no to the what, I can't do this, but you still satisfy the why. They walk away happy from you because their need was met, and you introduce someone who's looking for that kind of opportunity to realize that. So we only have very little time today, of course, but in conclusion, for this part at least, what should we remember? One, we're much more powerful than we think. Remember, people say yes twice as often than we think to weird requests. Can I have your phone? Can you take me over there? Two, saying no is difficult fundamentally because we want to belong. And if we think about ways of saying no better, one could be to change the situation, because the power of the situation is what the Milgram studies illustrated so well. Small changes make a huge difference. You can create distance, remove yourself from that situation, leverage communication channels to say no in the best possible way. Two, remember that saying no to these people means saying yes to your people, and remembering there are people in your lives, but they're not in the room. And that creates psychologically a difficult imbalance. Although you might care much more about your loved ones and your kids and friends and whoever and the people on your team, when you're facing a direct request, it's very difficult to stand up to that. So you got to make sure that we crystallize that. Maybe by looking at photos, maybe by remembering a time when we saw them or when we will see them again. And three, remember, we can say no to the what, but yes to the why, fulfilling the other person's interests so that they're happy because you solved their problem for them. And one elegant way of doing that is to remember that your no might be another person's yes. There might be someone who would love to organize Doesn't have to be teaching. Some people love cleaning up. I like cleaning up. My wife likes cooking. It kind of works quite well that way. But we all have our weird preferences. Yeah, that's it for now, at least. That's what I had. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Martin. That's a really insightful conversation. And I actually took some practical actions to practice while my boss is actually in the room. So I think he might get a little bit nervous later on. So for me, it really resonates very well about this piece of belonging. As a Chinese being in Germany for the last 12 years, always trying to fit in is a kind of the connection. For me, I am quite curious about, so I have two questions first, and then I definitely want to open up to the audience. You mentioned about definitely negotiation or saying no to people like in front of you, but envisioning someone that you care otherwhere. How about when you're having negotiation with somebody you really care? For example, you had this winning case about a dual career couple. Both of them ambitious, both of them have their career trajectory, but as well some family considerations. So how do people who actually care for each other, but having a bit different priorities or perhaps sometimes even values, can negotiate and say no to each other?
Oh, good. Good question. I mean, and I can speak only from my own experience because my wife works well. She's in Paris now. She's very successful. And so we have this dual career situation, I guess, with young kids. And one thing that helps us is if you think about longer time perspective, maybe for me, it's a no now, but it's a yes again tomorrow. Maybe there's a season in our life where someone takes priority, and there's another season when something else takes priority again. Kind of just recognizing that you don't have to solve everything in one moment if you have an ongoing relationship with each other, and that is hopefully a long-lasting one. But I think fundamentally, that's difficult to resolve. If you care about that person and about the other people, then it gets tricky, yeah.
Right. So my key takeaway is just expand the time horizon, expand the perspective. Think about it's not just now, but
at least that helps me a lot when I think about, oh no, like I don't know, something has to be organized or solved, and I feel like I do it now, recognizing that maybe next week I don't do that again.
All right. Then my second question actually comes also with the program I'm taking care, because I take care of the Women's Leadership Excellence Program in ESMT, which is helping women leaders to advance their leadership capabilities. So I frequently hear this topic about not able to say no. And then if you imagine women with advanced career having competing priorities and also needs and expectations from not just the work, but also family and also the society. So I'm wondering whether you have researches as well to show how women and men say no differently, what's blocking them differently, and also any other regarding culture differences, age differences that you can share with us?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one resource to that question might be there's a book called The No Club, and it's written by 4 female professors. And it's building on research that shows that women, more so than men, are asked to do non-promotable tasks. So in most jobs, there's some tasks that have to be done. Someone has to organize a committee or a lunch or something. It has to be done, but you don't get promoted for that. And it seems that women, more so than men, are being asked to do those tasks. And this book deals with strategies women can use to deal with that more effectively. There's other research which shows that women are also socially kind of punished for asking, but less so when they ask on behalf of someone else. So if a female leader asks for a salary increase, let's say, and that person says, I want to earn more money, and she does it only on behalf of herself, it seems there's a certain social backlash, but when it's asked on behalf of a wider group, that backlash seems to be diminished. And it seems more permissible or acceptable to ask.
All right. So key takeaway for me, at least, is when we are asked to do not promotable tasks, then we pause, just reflect, and also choose our channel and see how we can say no there.
Yeah, and maybe even recognize that that is a thing. Like I think oftentimes we're asked and we just say yes to things, but you might as well think about, what am I being asked about? Is it one of those tasks that nobody else wants to do or that needs to get done but doesn't get me promoted? And am I always being asked to do that? Or is it maybe something where it's really kind of my responsibility to now step up and say, yes, I'm also doing this because it's my turn or I'm the best person for the job?
All right, thank you. Okay, how about questions from the audience? You can just press that button and then speak through the mic.
Hi, thanks so much for your talk. I really enjoyed it. I have 2 questions. Can I ask them both?
Great, yeah, I guess so. I'm not saying no. I'm bad at saying no.
They're
so.
kind of, but not directly related. So the first question is about saying no for your own sake. So in a lot of the examples you gave in the talk, you positioned a no as a choice between 2 separate groups of people, and you have to decide which group is a priority. But what if the conflict is between your needs and someone else's needs? What would you suggest in that case?
You mean just 2 individuals, not 2 groups?
Yeah. Or let's say there are 2 groups, you want your time and you don't want to help either of them because you're overdrawn already.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mean, if you have this mental space to recognize that you can't or don't want to help either of them, the battle is almost half won. Because typically what most of us do, we just automatically say yes. And we don't stop and think, can I actually do that? And if we then say yes with one of these like weak yeses that sometimes, you know, a no is once, but a yes is not forever, but there's ongoing commitments typically. It's not just one call, it's a call and then another meeting. So just recognizing that, I think, can be really helpful for us to say no more effectively.
Great, thank you. And then the other question is sort of a stronger version of this question where, you know, I think any of the examples you shared could be posed as an ethical dilemma because those questions and those answers are related to your values.
Yeah.
But the Milgram experiment being a more extreme example, what do you think of situations where a person has a moral responsibility to say no?
Yeah. I mean, that's, I think, one reason why the Milgram studies became so kind of so illustrative is because clearly the participants knew it was wrong to keep going and they didn't want to do that. And if you asked third-party observers, should anyone continue? Everyone says, no, you shouldn't. But when you're in that situation, it seems difficult to remove yourself from that and to stand up and say, no, I don't want to do that. Which makes it a stronger version, as you say, of the typical request, which is, can you help with this? Can you do that? And yet, people struggle. But, I mean, this is, I think, what is so hopeful. Like, if you remember this one version of this study, all it took was to be in another room and to communicate via the phone, and it's 3 times easier to say no. Can we do that in our own life? Yes, we can. With most requests, you don't have to answer them straight away. You just have to ask for a bit of time.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for the chat. My question is more like around the title of the class was like more like negotiating with no.
Yeah.
And I felt like we were on the other side of the table, more like how to say no. And my question now is like, if I'm on the other side of the table, if someone in this class, I'm asking something and say no because participated in this talk, what are the best practice to get from a no to a yes? And like,
yeah, great. I mean, one we touched upon, right? To ask someone face to face. And it's awkward. People don't want to do that. I also find it easier to send a message than to go to someone. But if you need the yes, then it's clearly much better to go to someone directly and ask them. And if you can't ask them directly face to face, then call them and not email them. So the closer you can psychologically get to someone, the more likely they are to say yes. And then beyond that, there's a lot of research on, for example, if you are negotiating and you are making the first offer, if you make a first offer that is somewhat precise, So for example, you say you want to buy the car for 10,000 euros, that's one thing. But if you were to ask, you want to buy it for 9,350 euros, that additional level of precision communicates that you're more confident and that you know what you're talking about. That's one other thing you can do. And the third thing you can do, which is what Milgram also did actually, is to always first say what you're willing to give. So I give you $4 for 1 hour of your time. I give you a cookie if you clean up the room. Instead of saying, if you clean up the room, I give you a cookie. So in your offer structure, you always want to structure your offer so that the first thing you mention is valuable to the other person, and then you mention what's valuable to you. And because you have to do it anyways, one of the two ways, you might as well do it the right way. Yeah. Yes.
Sorry, the people online can't hear if you don't talk on a microphone.
So many valuable insights. Thank you so much. First of all, I would love to take your notes because I actually prefer the teaching and the consulting to the research.
Okay, there you go.
But to my question, I was wondering whether you have any thoughts on collateral damage when it comes to no's.
Oh.
And I have a one of many is I had to say no to a consulting gig because it was around my due date for my first child.
Right.
And all the contracts that did not happen as a result of saying no to this first thing just had such an impact on, on the future, basically. And this keeps on happening.
Oh, and on your future, on the people on your team?
Well, I guess both, but what I'm also concerned with is definitely growth, right? If you say, and that's why I mean collateral damage, if you say no to, for instance, that particular incident was training the leadership team of the DACH region, and it would have been 40 people with 40 different offices. So if you say no to this first thing, then you do not get the chance to meet these 40 decision makers to then create more business in the future.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. A weak answer, I think, would be not a weak answer, but sometimes it's enough to think. So in job negotiations, for example, if you're offered a job, it may be wise not to say no, but to say not now. Now, currently, I would love to take this job, but currently, for whatever reasons, I can't do. But when the circumstances change, you might be able to take up the offer again, because you never know when you have to go back to that offer, maybe. But in your case, it seems like a real values conflict where it's, are you there for that, whatever you want to be there for in the due date of your first child, or have to be there for? or do you just say that is not as important as this other thing? And those conflicts are difficult to resolve unless, of course, you could have, maybe there's someone else, not you, but your colleague, who does also a great job and who could do the first gig, but then the subsequent engagements you could have taken on again, maybe. But it's easy to say that now. And okay, yeah. So that sounds like a good solution. Or maybe it wasn't. It could have been better. It sounds like, but yeah.
Please, yeah.
So this is a very interesting conversation. So thanks.
Could you please talk to the mic? Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for this very interesting conversation. This is Fulya İlbey. I'm a strategist based in London, and I'm here in Berlin just by a coincidence. So it's good that I actually caught this event on the Science Week program. Between 2020 and 2023, I interviewed more than 30 people almost all over the world. And I asked them one question, which is actually a very personal interest to me. I asked them what kept you resilient during COVID and during the all parallel crisis. And I collected all these answers and I created a book, and it was recently published. One of the relevant answers to your topic was, resilience is, of course, a muscle to develop. So you are not becoming resilient personally, professionally, or organizationally overnight. And under that, one of the interesting answers is knowing to say no and to do that in the right time makes you resilient. This is also one of the very interesting findings to me. And parallel to that, one of the leadership qualities relevant to that, it must be that leaders actually should create the room for their people to say no when they like that case. So I would like to actually hear your opinions about that. So are you actually encountering similar answers in your researches?
You read my mind. That's actually a question I want to ask Martin as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing is, I mean, if you don't allow your people to, I mean, it's kind of, it's a tricky balance, right? If you have a team and all they do is say no to you, you can't get anything done. But if they always say yes to you, you don't know what's wrong. You don't know where their limits are. And they might leave you and the job instead of speaking up and saying at some point, that I cannot do now, but I could do it later. And so I guess as a leader, you have to find this balance of trusting your people to say no to you or to the requests at least, when it's sensible and when they need that space. And maybe also teach them to say no in helpful ways. So you don't just say, no, I can't do that, but maybe you can say, I can't do that, but what's the why behind the what? Maybe I can still solve the problem without doing what you're asking me to do. I think that is where this comes into play. But maybe, Qiao, you have...
Right. Adding to that, just a few thoughts. I think leaders definitely can also say no by themselves first, right? When their subordinate observing them in meetings that they are saying no to their line managers. That's also one way to role model. And then, of course, by learning from Martin, by giving that space, just say, you don't have to answer now, right? So I have this task, this is the intention, think about it, right? So you create also the space for your team to come back to that they understand why they're doing that, whether they can commit to that. So 2 thoughts to throw on the table. Please.
Hi, thanks for the great talk. You mentioned that the situation is like very important in how likely people are to say no or yes. And the example you gave is physical proximity. But I'm sure there's many other factors as well, like, for example, if you ask at office or after work, or whether people are extremely tired, that seems to work for political negotiations, which drag out long into the night. So like, what are other aspects of the situation that influence the tendency to say yes or no?
Yeah, I think you touched upon many of them. And one of the challenges with this field of psychology is that psychologists say the situation is very important, but there's not a clear map of what the situation actually is. So they would change, for example, physical proximity here. Another thing that Milgram did was they put someone else in the room who was also a teacher, and they observed that person giving shocks. And now 91% of people went all the way to the end because they felt like this additional pressure. In another variation of the experiment, they had almost like a modern matrix organization. There were 2 experimenters who contradicted each other. So the teacher says, I don't want to stop, I've stopped this is like horrible. And one boss experimenter says, you have to continue. And the other says, well, you can also quit now if you want. Which many people in organizations kind of feel like, if I don't have a direct boss, this is like reality of much of organizational life is a little like that. And then again, people find it much easier not to say, people find it easier to say no. Because they're like, well, there's conflict from my superiors, so then I can just do what I want. So those are just 2 of the factors he manipulated. And I think it's instructive because otherwise the situation here remains the same.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, do you recognize significant differences between cultures in regards to saying no?
Yeah. So, I mean, coming back to this paradigm, it seems that the cultural differences are not as big as one would think. And then other than that, I'm not familiar with good, solid research that explores this in a good way. But anecdotally, or speaking from my own experience, it seems clear that some cultures find it easier to directly say no, I'm not doing that. And other cultures kind of seem to say yes, but people who are really into the culture know that it means a no. And then there also, we used to live in France, and in Paris, there was this saying, the answer is no, but what was the question? Suggesting the default is kind of, nope, I'm not doing that. And now it's up to you to actually explain, what is it and what do you want from me? Whereas other cultures say kind of yes, yes, yes. And then you have to work yourself back from the yes to a no, which is very difficult to do. What is your experience? What's your sense?
I'm Israeli. In our culture, usually it's yes, and then what do you want us to do? So
Okay.
usually it's the other way around.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, and that culture also is not just national culture, right? The team culture, organizational culture could be also quite different even within one organization.
Yeah, right.
Okay, we have 3 questions, 3 minutes to say yes to questions, and then that's no. Any more questions?
Hi. I was wondering how to respond to requests that are not direct. Like in a very refined situations, they are very coercive. And one ends up saying yes without knowing. And how can we recover from a yes in a coercive?
What's an example of that?
For example, one is if I'm supposed to if I'm not knowledgeable in a context, and if I make an action, it means something, and I learn that I've made a decision later by acting in a context which I don't understand. So that's so mostly coercive, non-direct requests.
Right. That
Simple.
seems. I'm not even sure whether you're saying no in that. It sounds like you're not trying to say no. You're just trying to repair damage that has been done socially, maybe.
Yes, either of them. Yes. Say no or.
I'm not sure. I mean, so if the situation is one where someone asks you to do something, you actually realize you're not qualified yet, maybe. I think then it's fair to go back to the person and said, I didn't realize what this entailed. I thought you asked me for this. Now I realize you asked me for so much more that I can't do yet. It's better to say that early than to kind of let it drag on and on and on. And then the other person wonders why you're not delivering and why everything takes so long.
Yes. Thank you. Yes.
But that seems complicated.
Yeah, so my key takeaway from that is to say you can still say no after you say yes, right? So that's what trying to say, that better to clarify right afterwards if you figure out your intention and the why.
Yeah, I think so. I think all of us have been in situations where someone, and maybe, I'm sure I did that as well. I didn't say no, but the other person kind of realizes, I haven't heard from this guy in months. And that's always terrible, right? You don't want to be that person, but we all are sometimes. So then much better to early on, if we can qualify, I don't think I can live up to this commitment anymore. I have one research project that's been going on for 10 years now, I think. That's an example where I should do this. Yeah.
All right, thank you. I'm just really looking at the time. Thank you so much for the great question and conversation. Thank you, Martin, for this very insightful talk.
Thank you, Qiao. Thank you.